Hi, Professor PJ here, focusing on vocabulary used in communication studies, which, for this video, is burden of proof. You'll hear this term mostly in the context of critical thinking and argumentation, specifically in policy debate and law, but the concept is critical in most everyday persuasion. I'm capitalizing the B for this video to distinguish the burden of proof from a burden of proof, and I'll explain why later. As you'll probably look this phrase up in a basic online dictionary, that's where we'll start too. Dictionary.com offers two definitions: the obligation to offer evidence that a court or jury could reasonably believe in support of a contention, failing which the case will be lost, and the obligation to establish a contention as fact by evoking evidence of its probable truth. Look at the last part of the first definition, failing which the case will be lost. That means that if you can't prove something, you can't win that point. And if that point is big enough, you will have lost the entire argument, even if your opponent hasn't said a thing. Prove is in quotes, as you really can't prove anything. You can, however, prove to some degree. The threshold for proof varies depending on the situation. In the United States, for example, the burden is to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt for criminal cases. But for civil cases, the requirement is to prove that something is more likely than not, called a preponderance of evidence. Let's start with the discussion of the courts, as that carries over into other areas like academic debate. In a U.S. court, as well as in many other countries, if you are accused of a crime, you are presumed innocent until proven guilty. Again, in quotes. In a criminal case, it is the prosecution's burden, or onus, to prove that you had the motive, means, and opportunity to commit the crime of which you have been accused. Now let's briefly add another term, status quo, which dictionary.com defines as the existing state or condition. In our example, the status quo is that you are innocent. That's the existing state or condition. And you are presumed to remain so unless or until the prosecution meets its burden of proof. Then your status would change to proven guilty, because the prosecution has overcome the presumption that you are innocent. In academic debate terms, if you are opposing a change in the status quo, you would have presumption, which the Britannica Dictionary defines as an act of accepting that something is true until it is proven not true. We say that the opposition or the negative in an academic debate, because they oppose changing the status quo, enjoy presumption, while those advocating for a change in the status quo, the affirmative or the government, have the burden of proof. Technically, if you are a defendant, you don't have to prove that you didn't commit the crime. It may not be your best strategy, but you don't have to say anything. It's the prosecution's burden to prove that you committed the crime. The party, person, team, side, advocating a change in the status quo, has the burden of proof. But that may not be the case 100% of the time, so it's important to clarify that, and that can depend on the situation and the venue. In England, for example, if you are accused of libel, the Defamation Act of 2013 shifts the burden of proof to you as the defendant to show that the statement complained of, the libelous statement you are being sued for, is substantially true. The prosecution doesn't have to prove that your statement was defamatory. It starts out under the assumption, or presumes, that it is defamatory. In this case, the prosecution has presumption. However, in most cases, if you are advocating a change from the status quo, you have the burden to prove your case. Just make sure you know what the status quo is, because laws and customs change. So what was the status quo yesterday may not be the status quo today or tomorrow. A prime example is the difference between the U.S. Department of Justice's 1997 Terrorism in the United States report, highlighting that the U.S. had not had an international terrorism attack on U.S. soil, the status quo in 1997, and the newspaper accounts indicating a change in the status quo just 4 years later. Earlier, I made the distinction between the burden of proof, which I've been showing with a capital B throughout this video, and a burden of proof. The burden of proof is the responsibility of whoever is advocating a change in the status quo to prove its entire case. Don't assume that if you are supporting the status quo, you are arguing against the change, that you shouldn't put forth any arguments of your own. You probably should. But when you do, you also have a burden of proof, and that's a burden with a small b. Your responsibility to go beyond assertion and support any argument you advance with some sort of proof, like evidence or explanation. A few more terms you can add to your mental dictionary. I love sharing information like this, so check out my other videos. Learning about communication topics is fun, and I think valuable.